She didn't cry when the police knocked on her door. She didn't scream when they told her that her daughter's body had been found naked in the forest. She just looked up at the sky and said 2 words, "Game over." Then she went silent. She didn't speak for days. Even when she was admitted to the psychiatric ward, she didn't utter a single word. I met her at the hospital. When I walked into her room during my volunteer work, I didn't see a person. I saw a shell, an emptied vessel, a body with its soul ripped out. In my 22 years of practice, I had never seen such a gaze. There was no pain in those eyes, no anger, just nothingness. And when I learned the story behind that nothingness, for the first time in my life, I cried after leaving a session. Because what had happened to this woman was far beyond what any human being should have to carry. Our first real conversation happened 3 weeks later. She said just one sentence to me: "I was born a loser." At the time, I didn't understand what that meant, but as I learned her story piece by piece, I realized that every word of that sentence was written in blood. In some sessions, my patients healed as they talked, but some stories never left my mind. Today, I'm going to tell you about one of those lives. If you're listening to the story and you also have things you can't keep inside, share what you're going through and where you're listening from in the comments. I read every comment, I hear every story. If you want to stay updated on the therapy stories, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If this story touched your feelings, you can support me by liking. One day, I'd like to hear your story too. If you want me to share your story in my next video, you can send it to the email address in my profile. Remember, our stories heal a little when they're shared. I first heard Margaret's name from the nurses. The woman in room 3111, they said. She hasn't said a word in 3 weeks. She won't eat. She just stares at the ceiling. When I entered her room, the light coming through the window illuminated half of her face. The other half remained in shadow. That's when I realized this woman's entire life had been like this. Half in the light, half in the dark. And the dark side had always won. I sat down next to her. I didn't wait for her to speak. I was just there. The first day she said nothing. The second day either. On the third day she moved her hand. She gripped the sheet. Her fingers tensed, then relaxed. That small movement told me a lot. There was still something inside her. She hadn't completely died. Post-traumatic dissociative responses are typically the mind's self-protection mechanism. Margaret's silence indicated that the pain she had experienced was too great to express in words. But that hand movement, gripping and releasing the sheet, gave me hope. Her body was still trying to connect with the world, even if her mind had fled. On the 4th day, she said her first word. Water. I handed her the glass. She took it, drank a sip. Then she looked at me. There was such deep exhaustion in that gaze, as if she hadn't slept for centuries. "Why are you here?" she asked. Her voice was cracked, unused for days. "I came to listen to you," I said. She shook her head. "There's nothing to hear. The story is over." "The story isn't over," I said. "You're still here." Her eyes flashed for a moment, with anger or pain, I couldn't tell. "I'm not here," she said. "I died a long time ago. My body just hasn't realized it yet." In those first weeks, I began to gather pieces of Margaret's story. From the nurses, from her file, sometimes from half-words that escaped her lips, and each piece was darker than the last. A childhood spent at a mother's sickbed, a monster that emerged from a father's bottle, secrets hidden in a daughter's body, the face behind a husband's mask, and a child whose mother had done everything to protect her but still couldn't. There were no heroes in this story, only survivors, and Margaret was tired of even surviving. But I didn't yet know that the real darkness was much deeper. The secret Margaret carried wasn't just her own pain. That secret was a curse passed down from generation to generation. And when I learned that curse, I too broke a little. After she said that sentence, she fell silent again. But this time it was different. This silence wasn't a wall. It was a door. And behind that door, there was a hell waiting to be told. The trembling in her voice when she mentioned her mother, the clenching of her fists when she said her father's name. I didn't yet know that this woman's life had been cursed before she was even born. Margaret began telling her story, starting with her mother. Her voice softened. Her eyes drifted to somewhere far away, as if she wasn't in this room but in that small house of her childhood. Her mother had a muscle disease, myasthenia gravis, a condition where the muscles gradually weaken, where control slowly slips away. When Margaret was only 5 years old, her mother could no longer walk. First a cane, then a wheelchair, finally the bed. She was confined to her bed. Each day she faded a little more, became a little more translucent. Her father, on the other hand, her father drank. Every night he drank. And as he drank, he became a monster. My father worked during the day, Margaret said, at a factory. By the time he came home in the evening, he had already started drinking. There was always a bottle in his jacket pocket. When he came through the door, I could tell from his tone of voice what was going to happen that night. How could you tell? If he came in quietly, he would just drink and fall asleep. But if he came in shouting... Margaret's voice trembled. If he came in shouting, someone was going to suffer that night. Margaret slept next to her mother most nights. With her tiny body, she tried to protect her mother. Since her mother couldn't get out of bed, Margaret had become her eyes, ears, hands, and feet. A 5-year-old child had turned into a caretaker for a sick mother. When my father was drunk, he would go to my mother's room first, Margaret said. Her eyes darkened. My mother couldn't defend herself. She couldn't even move. And I would wait behind the door listening. I would hear my mother's pleas, sometimes the sound of slaps, sometimes worse things. What would you do? I was small. What could I do? Margaret's voice cracked. One night I gathered my courage and went in. I hung onto my father's arm. Leave my mother alone, I shouted. She paused. Her fingers gripped the sheet again. Her breathing quickened. My father turned and looked at me. I'll never forget the rage in his eyes. He got off my mother and walked toward me. That night was the first time he beat me. I was 7 years old. Then what? I asked softly. Then it was always my turn, she said. Her voice was so low I could barely hear it. I was small. I didn't understand why he was beating me. It just hurt. Everything hurt. And then after a while, I stopped feeling the pain. My body felt it, but I was going somewhere else. Somewhere else? Inside my head, Margaret said. I created a world with just me and my mother, without my father, without violence. In that world we were safe. In that world we were happy. Every time my father beat me, I would escape to that world. Childhood trauma, especially physical violence from a parent, fundamentally shakes a person's core sense of safety. Margaret's attempts to protect her mother were what we call parentification, a child taking on the parental role. A 5-year-old child had been forced to become both caregiver and protector for her sick mother. This was the theft of her childhood. But more importantly, Margaret's description of going somewhere else, this was a defense mechanism we call dissociation. When the mind cannot cope with unbearable pain, it separates itself from the body. This was a survival strategy, but the cost was heavy. Didn't your mother protect you? I asked. Margaret looked at me with a bitter smile. I can't blame my mother. She couldn't get out of bed. She wanted to protect me, but her body wouldn't allow it. Sometimes I would hear her crying from the next room while my father beat me. Those cries hurt me more than my own pain. Her hands were trembling now. Even after all these years, those memories were still alive in her body. But my mother, she continued, her voice breaking, my mother was my light. Despite everything, in that dark house, in the shadow of that monster of a man, my mother was my sun. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. She had learned not to cry over the years. Crying was showing weakness in front of her father, and weakness meant more pain. But when she talked about her mother, the frozen lake inside this woman had begun to crack, and I didn't yet know what dark waters would emerge when that lake melted. When my father went to work, Margaret said, the house transformed into a different place. It was like a spell was broken. The darkness would recede, the light would enter. For the first time, a faint smile appeared on her face. It lasted only a moment, like a flash, but I saw it. My mother would sing me songs. Old songs, lullabies she had learned from her grandmother. Her voice was weak, the illness had taken that too, but to me it sounded like the most beautiful voice in the world. She would tell me stories.
Princesses, fairies, faraway lands. In those stories, the bad guys always lost. The good ones always won. Margaret's eyes misted over. She would brush and braid my hair. Her hands trembled. The disease affected her hands too. But she would still braid my hair for hours. "Your hair is like mine," she would say. "When I was young, I had long, dark hair like this too." My mother couldn't get out of bed, but she could use her hands. She taught me to knit. We started with simple things, a scarf, a beanie, then more complex things. She also taught me to draw, how to hold a pencil, draw a line, shade. We would spend hours together in silence. She would knit, I would draw. "We would dream together," Margaret continued. Her voice wavered. "One day we would leave this house, just the two of us. We would live in a small house by the sea. I would go to school in the mornings, and when I came home in the evening, my mother would be waiting for me. There would be food on the table. And my father wasn't in that dream. Never. Never." Every day I would run home from school. We had a few hours before my father came home. Those hours were the happiest moments of my life. I would lie down next to my mother, put my head on her chest, and listen to her heartbeat. Her heartbeat was slow. The disease had tired her heart too, but it gave me peace. In that moment, everything was fine. Nothing in the outside world could touch us. Sometimes my mother would say to me, "Be strong. These days will pass too. One day you'll grow up, build your own life, and I'll be proud of you." I would remember those words during every blow from my father. I had to be strong. For my mother. For both of us. The bond Margaret formed with her mother was the only thing that kept her alive in a traumatic childhood. Psychologists call this a safe harbor, the single fixed point a child can hold onto in a chaotic world. But this bond came at a cost. Margaret didn't just love her mother, she was dependent on her. Her mother was her entire emotional world. This would carry a great risk in the future. What if her mother was gone? And more importantly, all of Margaret's happiness was confined to the moments when her father wasn't there. Just a few hours a day. The rest was fear, violence, and waiting. What does it do to a child's psyche to spend most of their time in fear? How does being constantly on alert wear down the body and mind? "In the evenings, my father would come home," Margaret continued. Her voice hardened. Her jaw tightened. "The moment I heard the door open, my heart would race. My ears would focus on that sound. How were his footsteps? Was he stumbling? Did he knock something over?" "You were trying to predict your father's behavior in advance." "To survive," Margaret said. "I had learned. If he came in quietly, he would take his drink and go sit in front of the television. Those nights we were safe, but if he slammed the door, threw things, cursed, then my mother and I would look at each other. That look said everything. Be careful. Be quiet. Be invisible." Margaret closed her eyes. I would hide next to my mother, listening to her breathing, saying I had a headache and couldn't sleep. But sometimes it didn't work. Sometimes my father would find me, or when he wanted to punish my mother, he would hit me. Because hitting me hurt my mother more than hitting her. Watching me get hit. "Did your mother tell you this?" "Once," Margaret said. "After my father beat me, my mother was crying. 'I wish he had hit me instead,' she said. 'Watching him hit you hurts more.' That night, I understood that my father knew this. He did it on purpose. He hurt my mother the most by hitting me." Margaret's hands were trembling. "And I would escape into my dreams. Just my mother and me. In that world, there was no father, no violence, no fear. Those dreams kept me standing for years." Margaret took a deep breath, as if she was preparing to say something. Her shoulders tensed, her jaw clenched, but then she gave up. She swallowed something back. It wasn't time yet. There was something this woman was keeping inside. Something about her father, something she hadn't told. I would need more time to learn that thing. As our sessions progressed, Margaret began to open up more, but she still had a wall. Every time she talked about her father, she would pause, leave some sentences unfinished. Her eyes would freeze at one point. One day I asked her, "Margaret, is there something you haven't told me about your father?" Her face turned to stone, as if she had put on a mask. "I've told you everything," she said, but her voice was trembling. I didn't push. She would tell when the time came, or she wouldn't. But as a therapist, I knew that there was something buried inside this woman about her father. That thing must have shaped this woman's entire life. One day, while talking about her mother's final years, she unexpectedly arrived somewhere. "I was 17, she said. Her voice suddenly changed. became monotone, distant. My belly had started to grow. My heart tightened. I knew what was coming, but I waited for Margaret to tell it. I didn't rush at all. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. My period wasn't coming, but I didn't know much at that age. They didn't teach it at school. I couldn't talk to my mother about it, and I never talked to my father about anything. When did you understand? My mother noticed. One day she saw me coming out of the bathroom. She looked at my belly. I'll never forget the expression on her face. Margaret swallowed. There was fear, worry, but also something else. An understanding, as if she already knew. What did she ask? Who was all she asked. One word. Who? Margaret's eyes fixed on the darkest corner of the room. Her hands were clasped together in her lap. I started to cry. I couldn't control it. My whole body was shaking. He left me, I told my mother. I had a boyfriend. He left me. While I told this lie, I felt like I was suffocating. Every word was stuck in my throat. Margaret's body language while recounting this memory alarmed me. Her eyes avoiding, her voice becoming monotone, telling the story as if she were someone else. These were dissociative symptoms. A girl who got pregnant at 17 saying, he left me. Something was missing from this story. Something didn't add up. What did her mother's look that seemed like she already knew mean? And why was Margaret struggling so much, even after all these years? But I didn't ask yet. It wasn't time. This secret needed to come out in its own time, in its own way. My mother comforted me, Margaret continued. Her voice softened a bit. She pulled me close. She stroked my hair, just like she did when I was little. And she said, don't be sad. This child didn't come with your punishment. This child will be your salvation. The happy days we had, you'll live them with this child. Take good care of her. And one day you sing songs to her too, tell stories, just like I did for you. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. My mother's words kept me standing. That baby, even before she was born, became my source of hope. What about your father? Was he still alive during that time? Margaret's face turned to stone. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers became fists. My father? She took a deep breath. My father was alive until I got married. And yes, those things continued. For years. I waited in silence. But I learned, Margaret said. There was an unexpected strength in her voice. When I was little, I was defenseless. But as I grew up, I learned to protect myself. I put a lock on my door. I stayed awake all night. I knew when he would come, from the smell of alcohol, from the sound of his footsteps, from the door handle moving. How did you protect yourself? I tried every way, Margaret said. Her eyes drifted far away. Sometimes I hid in the closet. Sometimes I would climb out the window and sleep in the shed in the garden, even in the cold. Sometimes I would go to my mother's side. My father wouldn't do it next to my mother because my mother knew, and he couldn't do it while looking into my mother's eyes. Couldn't your mother intervene? Margaret laughed bitterly. My mother couldn't get out of bed, but one night when my father came again, my mother shouted. For the first time in her life, she shouted, "Don't touch her," she said. Her voice was so strong that my father was shocked. That night, he backed off. But the next day, my mother got much worse. Shouting had drained her. After that day, my mother got even weaker. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. My mother gave her life for me. That shout killed her a little more, but she protected me. That night, and for the next few months, my father stayed away. I think he was afraid of that look in my mother's eyes. What happened then? Then I grew up. By the time I was 15, 16, I wasn't a child anymore. I could stand up to my father. One night, I took a knife in my hand and said, "If you ever come to my room again, I'll kill you." He looked into my eyes, and he saw I wasn't bluffing. After that night, he never came like that again. What Margaret described showed how powerful the human survival instinct can be, even within trauma. As a child, she was defenseless, but as she grew, she developed her own protection mechanisms. This wasn't post-traumatic growth. This was pure survival instinct. But the cost was heavy. Margaret had learned to be constantly on alert to feel safe. This hypervigilance would never leave her, even years later. But the damage had already been done, Margaret said. Her voice lowered. By the time I turned 17 and my belly started growing, it had already happened, years ago, and I
I couldn't tell anyone. I told my mother I had a boyfriend. I lied, because telling the truth would have destroyed everything. Did your father find out you were pregnant? No. My mother hid it. As my belly grew, I wore loose clothes. I didn't leave the house. And then when I was 20, 2 years after I got married, my father drank too much one night. It hit his heart. They took him to the hospital. He died a week later. What did you feel? Nothing, Margaret said. Her voice was ice cold. I felt nothing. Just relief. It was finally over. That man was finally gone. I didn't go to his funeral. I never saw his grave. And I never regretted it. That phrase, that man, came up again. Margaret referred to her father not as my father, but as that man. This word choice was not a coincidence. And the relief she felt at her father's death, was it just from the violence ending? Or was it from something deeper? Margaret was hiding something. Something big. And that secret had shaped this woman's entire life. I didn't know yet, but I could feel it. The darkest chapter of this story hadn't been told yet. When my baby was born, Margaret said, her voice filled with genuine warmth, for the first time, the world changed. Everything changed. When they placed that tiny body in my arms, for the first time in my life, I felt truly alive. I named her Lily, my mother's favorite flower. My mother always said, lilies bloom even in the mud. They find beauty even in the darkest places. Lily would be like that too, a flower blooming in our darkness. Tell me about Lily. Margaret's eyes sparkled, this time with real light, not false. She was so tiny she fit in my palm. Her fingers were minuscule. When I looked at her fingernails, I couldn't believe it. How could something this small, this perfect exist? Her eyes were like mine, dark brown, deep. She looked like my mother too. My mother cried when she first saw her. This child is the continuation of both of us, she said. Margaret paused. She took a deep breath. When I first saw her for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to love something, completely, unconditionally, boundlessly. That baby was my everything. She was the reason I breathed. How long did your mother see Lily? 3 years, Margaret said, her smile widening but sadness appearing in her eyes. 3 beautiful years. My mother couldn't get out of bed, but I would put Lily in her lap. Lily would touch my mother's face with those little hands. She would stroke my mother's wrinkles. And my mother, in those moments, she looked young. She looked happy. It was like the illness was forgotten for a moment. When Lily started talking, her first word was, Nana. She called my mother Nana. Every time my mother heard Nana, her eyes would sparkle. This child is keeping me alive, she would reverently. Lily was a savior for Margaret. This baby was the only ray of light falling into a dark life. Margaret's transformation while talking about Lily was extraordinary. Her voice softened, her shoulders relaxed, her facial muscles loosened, life appeared in her eyes. Lily had given Margaret a reason to live. But such intense dependency could also be dangerous. If you have only one source of light and it goes out, what happens? The darkness becomes even more intense. And for Margaret's mother too, Lily was a reason to live. 2 generations had attached themselves to one small child. That child carried all the hope of 2 women on her shoulders. But time doesn't stop, Margaret said. Her voice became heavy. My mother got weaker every day. When Lily was 3, my mother could hardly speak anymore. She could only look, and in those looks, there was so much love, so much sadness. One morning, Margaret stopped. She swallowed. One morning I went to wake my mother. Lily was beside me. My mother's eyes were open, but she wasn't seeing anymore. Her chest wasn't moving. Her hands were cold. She had passed away in her sleep, peacefully. But I wasn't at peace. The only person who truly loved me in the world was gone. I was left alone. Alone with my 3-year-old daughter. Alone with that secret I could never tell anyone. How did Lily react? She didn't understand. She kept saying, Nana's sleeping. For days, Nana's sleeping, and then she stopped asking. Children forget. But I couldn't forget, and I still can't. Margaret fell silent for a long time after she finished talking about her mother. She was somewhere else, in that little house, by that bed, next to that woman who loved her. But something was happening in her eyes. A kind of settling. Now that she had told about her mother, the next stage was waiting. Her husband, the man she married to escape loneliness. And that man would become one of the darkest chapters of this story. Margaret's voice changed as she talked about the years after her mother's death. Harder, more distant. After my mother died, the world seemed to stop. Lily was 3. I was 20 years old, a completely alone mother. My father was still alive then, but I had already killed him in my mind. He didn't exist to me. How did you get by? I worked every job, cleaning, dishes, waitressing. I worked during the day, took care of Lily at night. I had forgotten what sleep was. But I did everything for Lily. She was my only reason to breathe. Margaret looked toward the window, her eyes fixed on a point in the distance. When Lily was 4, I started working as a waitress at a restaurant. On the edge of town, by the highway. Truckers, workers would come. The tips weren't bad. And one day, Thomas came. Tell me about Thomas. Margaret's lips tightened, an ambiguous expression, a smile or pain. He was different from the others. He was dressed clean. He was shaved. His smile was warm. At least it seemed that way. Good morning, beautiful lady, he said the first time he saw me. A simple phrase, but no one had called me beautiful in years. No one had looked at me like a human being in years. He showed you attention. He started coming every day. He would always sit at my table, talk to me. He would ask about my life, ask about Lily. He would listen, really listen, or at least he appeared to. One day he brought flowers, yellow roses. I had told him once that my mother loved roses. Margaret shook her head. He had remembered, or he had pretended to remember. At that time I couldn't tell the difference. Margaret's attraction to Thomas was no coincidence. Individuals with trauma history often unconsciously recreate the dynamics they're familiar with. This is called repetition compulsion. But Margaret's situation was more complex. She had experienced a childhood devoid of love, exposed to violence. When someone showed her attention, she had no experience to distinguish whether that attention was genuine or manipulative. Thomas saying, "Beautiful lady," bringing flowers for someone else, these might be normal romantic gestures. But for Margaret, it was like finding water in a desert. Thomas promised me a life. You and Lily, you're not alone anymore, he said. I'll take care of you, we'll be a family. And I wanted to believe. I wanted so badly to believe. You got married. Lily was 5. We had a small ceremony at the municipality with 2 strangers as witnesses. Lily carried flowers. She looked so happy that day. I have a dad now, she had said. That sentence. Margaret paused, swallowed. That sentence both broke and healed my heart. How were the first months? It was like a dream. Thomas was good to Lily. He bought toys, took her to the park, read her stories at night. He was good to me too. He cooked sometimes, helped with housework. For the first time in my life, I felt like a normal family. Margaret's face darkened, but the honeymoon ended. 6 months later, the real Thomas started to emerge. What happened? He wasn't working. I'm looking for a job, he said at first. Then I'm going to start my own business. We'll be rich. But actually he was doing nothing. He would sleep in late, meet with friends in the afternoon, come home drunk in the evening. Margaret's voice hardened. Sound familiar? Like my father. Alcoholic, irresponsible, a liar. I had fallen into the same cycle, but this time I couldn't escape. Because there was Lily, and Lily was calling Thomas dad. How was the economic situation? I was working still at that restaurant. Thomas was spending the money I earned on alcohol, gambling, nonsense he called business investments. We couldn't pay rent anymore. The landlord kicked us out. And Thomas? Thomas had an old trailer. We moved there. A trailer? On the outskirts of town, at the edge of a field. Tiny, rusty, freezing cold in winter, suffocating hot in summer. 3 people in that cramped space. But at least, we had a roof. Margaret closed her eyes. Lily never complained. It's like an adventure mom, she had said the first night. We're camping. She was such a positive child. She had taken my positivity. While I was drowning in darkness, she was still looking for light. What were you thinking during that period? I was thinking only one thing. Lily's education. I was saving every penny. Lily would go to school. She would go to university. She would break this cycle. I couldn't escape from my father, from my mother's illness, from Thomas. But Lily would escape. That was my only dream. What did Thomas think about this? Margaret's eyes hardened, her jaw tightened. Thomas saw Lily as a burden. How much money are you spending on this child, he would ask. Why are you saving for school? She'll grow up and work, earn money anyway. I would pretend not to hear these words. I tried not to fight, because when we fought, Thomas changed. How did he change? Margaret was silent for a moment. Her hands trembled. He never hit me. He never hit. But he could cause pain in other ways, with his words, with his silence, by not speaking for days, acting as if I didn't exist. And sometimes, by yelling at Lily. When he yelled at Lily, I would do anything to silence him. Anything. Thomas's behaviors were classic patterns of emotional abuse. There was no physical violence, at least against Margaret, but there was psychological violence every day. And most importantly, Thomas was using Lily as a weapon. He knew that Margaret's weakest point was Lily. He used this knowledge to control her. Margaret had married a man like her father, only this time instead of fists, there were words and silence. I endured everything, Margaret continued, for years, only for Lily. When Margaret said I endured everything, a crack formed in her voice. Behind that crack were years of accumulated anger, pain, helplessness. This woman had endured all her life, her father, her mother's illness, poverty, Thomas. But there was a limit to endurance, and when she told me about Lily starting to get sick, my heart would clench. But when I learned that secret, the world went dark for me too. Margaret's body tensed, her shoulders rose, her jaw clenched. She didn't want to come to this topic, but there was no escape anymore. When Lily turned 13, she began, her voice trembling. Strange things started happening. What kind of things? She would get sick at least one day every week. Fever, delirium, sometimes vomiting. She wasn't herself on those days. Her eyes were open, but no one was inside. The next day she would recover, go to school. The next week, the same thing, and the next, and the next. Did you take her to a doctor? Margaret lowered her head, her hands clasped together in her lap. I had no money, no insurance. Thomas wouldn't even give medicine money. She has a fever, it'll pass. Without, you would say, she's growing hormones, he would say. Don't waste money, he would say. And I wanted to believe. Because the alternative was too terrible. What do you mean? Margaret raised her head. There was deep guilt in her eyes. There was a voice inside me. A small voice. Something's wrong, it said. This isn't normal, it said. But I silenced that voice, because thinking about what that voice was saying was unbearable. What Margaret described was the most painful form of the denial mechanism. Instinctively, she knew something was wrong. A mother's instinct rarely fails. But knowing didn't mean accepting. Accepting meant facing a terrible truth. And Margaret had already faced too many terrible truths in her life. This time, her mind was trying to protect her. But protection can sometimes be the greatest danger. Lily was changing before my eyes, Margaret continued. Her voice thickened as if a lump had formed in her throat. Her under eyes were always purple. She was constantly tired. She had lost weight. She wasn't eating anymore. She wasn't smiling. She was avoiding me somehow. But I couldn't understand why. Wasn't she talking to you? She was, but it was different. Short answers, no eye contact. When I entered her room, she would flinch and close the door. I told myself, puberty. I said normal. I said it'll pass. Margaret's hands began to tremble. One night, Lily had a nightmare. She woke up screaming. I ran to her. I wanted to hug her. And Lily pushed me away. Don't touch me, she screamed. Don't touch me. There was such fear in her eyes that fear pierced me. But still, I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand. What was Thomas saying during this period? Margaret's face turned to stone. Thomas was consoling me. Don't worry, he would say. She's not eating enough, vitamin deficiency, he would say. Give her more meat, he would say. And I trusted him, because who else was I going to trust? There was a long silence. That was my biggest mistake, Margaret said. Trusting Thomas. It was like standing next to the killer and asking, where is this blood coming from? And I did that. I became an accomplice in my daughter's murder. When Margaret said, I became an accomplice in my daughter's murder, the air in the room changed. This woman didn't just see herself as a failed mother. She saw herself as an accomplice. And I didn't yet fully know what had happened. But I would know. When she began, that day I came home early, I would know everything. Margaret took a deep breath. She closed her eyes, as if she was going back to that day, unwillingly, forcibly, but inevitably. One day I left work early, she said, Her voice was robotic, emotionless. This was her way of protecting herself. I was nauseous. Maybe my body knew I needed to go home. I don't know. I just felt like I had to go home. What did you see when you got home? I saw Thomas talking on the phone behind the trailer. It seemed strange. At that time of day, he was usually at the bar with friends. While he was on the phone, his back was to me. He was laughing. That laugh, I'll never forget it. It was as if he was laughing at a joke. Margaret's hands became fists. I went inside, quietly. I don't know why I went in quietly. It was instinctive, I think. The trailer is small, everything can normally be heard. But that day I felt like I needed to be quiet. Then, something was wrong. There was something in the air. I don't know how to describe it. A smell, a feeling, I don't know. It was just wrong. And I looked at Lily's room, that tiny compartment. Margaret fell silent. There was a long silence. Her breathing had quickened. I need to tell it, she said to herself. I need to tell it so that someone knows, so that Lily's story doesn't get lost. She opened her eyes. She looked directly at me. I looked through the curtain, and I saw. Her voice dropped to a whisper. There was a man, one of Thomas's friends. I didn't even know his name. And that man was on top of Lily. She stopped. She swallowed. Lily's eyes were open, but no one was inside. They were empty. Her gaze was fixed on the ceiling. She wasn't moving. She wasn't making a sound. It was as if she wasn't there. Her body was there, but Lily was gone. What Margaret described was the most severe form of dissociation. Lily was separating from her body in those moments, just like Margaret did as a child. When the mind cannot cope with the unbearable, it shuts itself down. She wasn't there. These words actually described Lily's only way of surviving. And Margaret was seeing the same thing in her daughter that she had experienced in her own childhood. That escape to the dream world, that going somewhere else. It wasn't genetic, it was learned. But this time, the teacher was different. I understood, Margaret said. In that moment, I understood everything. The illnesses, the fevers, the delirium. Thomas was putting something in her food, sleeping pills, sedatives, I don't know what. And then he would call his friends. For money? Margaret laughed bitterly. For money. Yes, he was selling his own stepdaughter to strange men for money. And I didn't notice for months, maybe years. Margaret's body was trembling. At that moment I lost my mind. I really did. I saw everything red. I ran to the kitchen. Thomas had a gun in a drawer, he said, for protection. I took it. I ran. I aimed at that man and fired. Did you hit him? Grazed his arm. Blood flowed. The man screamed. Lily still wasn't moving. The drugs hadn't worn off. And I looked at that man's face. There was fear in his eyes. He was afraid of me. And that fear gave me strength. What happened then? Thomas ran inside. He saw the gun, the blood, his friend. What are you doing? He shouted. I aimed the gun at him. Get out, I said. Both of you get out. If you ever set foot in this trailer again, I'll kill you. And then I'll go to the police and tell everything. What did Thomas say? Margaret's lips curled. He begged. He fell to his knees. I did it for money, he said. I did it for you, for Lily, so we could survive, he said, as if he had done me a favor. What did you say? Nothing. I just kept aiming the gun, and they left. Thomas took his friend and left. A week later I sent divorce papers. He left me the trailer, in exchange for me not going to the police. He was a coward. He was very afraid of going to prison. The strength Margaret showed in that moment was the accumulation of years. She had been abused by her father, witnessed her mother's death, been manipulated by Thomas. But in that moment, for her daughter, she turned all that trauma into a weapon. The gun wasn't just metal, it was all of Margaret's rage, all her pain, all the revenge for the years she couldn't protect. And most importantly, Margaret made a choice in that moment. Not revenge, but protection. She could have killed the man, but she didn't, because Lily needed her. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked. Margaret didn't answer for a long time. Then she spoke quietly. Lily didn't remember anything, because of the drugs. And I thought, if I go to the police, Lily will learn everything. Courts, questions, confrontations. I couldn't expose Lily to trauma again, so I stayed silent. I stayed silent to protect Lily. But Lily somehow knew, didn't she? Her body remembered. Tears began to stream from Margaret's eyes. Yes, she knew. She knew without knowing, and I ignored it. just like I ignored the illnesses. Margaret was crying now. Silently, softly, the tears she had held for years were finally flowing, and I understood that this woman had experienced the same trauma twice, herself as a child, her daughter as an adult. The same darkness with different faces. But there was still a question in my mind. Who was Lily's father? Margaret had gotten pregnant at 17. He left me, she had said. But in this story there was no trace of the father leaving. There was only the father himself. Margaret wiped her eyes. She took a deep breath. She was trying to pull herself together. After Thomas left, she said, Lily and I were left alone. In the trailer. Far from the world, just the two of us. How was Lily? At first, she was fine, or she appeared to be. She didn't remember anything, or she pretended not to remember. She was smiling. She was going to school. Mom, now it's just us, she said one day. That's a good thing. And I believed her too. I wanted to believe. But it changed, didn't it? Margaret nodded. Lily started changing after 15, slowly. First small things, irritations, closing doors, late arrivals home. I said puberty. I said normal, but it wasn't puberty. Suppressed traumas continue to live in the subconscious. Even if Lily didn't consciously remember, her body had recorded everything. When puberty brought hormonal changes, these records began to surface. Anger outbursts, risky behaviors, tendencies to self-harm. All of these were manifestations of unprocessed trauma. And Margaret couldn't see the reason behind these behaviors, because seeing meant facing that dark night. By the time Lily turned 17, Margaret continued, we were fighting every day. She was opposing everything. You can't control my life, she would shout. Leave me alone, she would say. And she would look at me as if she hated me. How did you feel? Helplessness, fear, and guilt, because I knew. Even if Lily didn't know, I knew why she was like this. Her anger wasn't really at me. She was angry at something she didn't know, a darkness she couldn't remember. And I was an accomplice to that darkness. How were her friends? Margaret's face darkened. She started hanging out with bad friends, kids who skipped school, smoked, drank, and she was dating a guy. I called him Jake, but I never learned his real name. He was 8 years older than Lily, a 25-year-old man with a 17-year-old girl. Did you object? I did. I shouted, I begged, I threatened. But Lily didn't listen. Who are you to interfere in my life? She said. How would you know what I've been through, she said. And that sentence cut me like a knife. Because I knew exactly what she had been through, but I couldn't say it. Why couldn't you tell her? Margaret's voice trembled. I tried. One night when Lily was calm, I sat next to her. There's something I need to talk to you about, I said, but I looked at Lily's face and I got scared. What if she remembers? What if everything comes back? What if she blames me? Rightfully blames me. So I backed off. I love you, was all I said. And Lily rolled her eyes. Margaret's last sentence hung in the air. Lily rolled her eyes. A simple gesture, but within it was the accumulated distance of years. Mother and daughter had grown apart, and Margaret hadn't been able to do what it took to come closer, because coming closer meant facing the past. And in that past, Margaret herself was also a victim. Margaret didn't speak for a long time. She looked out the window. The sky had darkened. I hadn't noticed when it had become evening. That night, she finally said. Her voice was flat, emotionless, distant. That night, Lily wanted to go to a party. What party? Jake's friend's party. At a farm outside the city. Lily told me she didn't have to tell she was 17. She could go, but she told. Maybe she was expecting permission. Maybe she wanted to make me angry, I don't know. What did you say? I said no. I said, you can't go anywhere with that man. I said, that man acts like he loves you, but he's using you. And Lily exploded. Margaret's voice trembled. Using me? She said, what do you know about me? When were you ever there in my life? You were always working, always tired, always busy with something else. And then she said, Margaret stopped. She swallowed. I hate you, she said. You ruined my life. I wish I had a different mother. What did you do? I couldn't do anything. I froze. Those words killed me. And Lily looked at my face, as if she had won a victory, turned around and slammed the door behind her. Margaret closed her eyes. Those were her last words. I hate you. The last expression I saw on her face was anger. And I didn't go after her. I let her go, because I was too tired. I'm sorry, I can't repeat that text verbatim because it contains graphic sexual violence, which I'm not allowed to reproduce. If you'd like, I can provide a summary of the passage, non-graphic, help rewriting it in a safer form, or discuss its themes, characters, or emotional content. Just tell me how you'd like to proceed. She stopped. She swallowed. Her fingers gripped the sheet. My father raped me for years, from age 8 to age 17. And Lily, her voice cracked. Lily was my father's child, my own father's. She was his own grandchild at the same time. That moment was one of the heaviest moments of my 22-year career. Everything fell into place. Margaret's deep hatred for her father, referring to him as that man, not going to his funeral, learning to protect herself over the years, getting pregnant at 17, saying, I was born a loser. This woman had been abused by her own father since childhood, and Lily, the fruit of that abuse, that beautiful, innocent girl, was both Margaret's greatest pain and greatest love. Margaret had seen herself in Lily, two souls coming from the same darkness, carrying the same pain, and Margaret had thought that by protecting Lily, maybe she could protect herself. But she couldn't protect her, just like she couldn't protect herself. The cycle had repeated, with different masks, but the same darkness. My mother knew, Margaret said. She knew what my father was doing to me. But my mother was bedridden. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't protect. She could only look at me. And in those looks, there were worlds, pain, guilt, helplessness, love, all together. What did your mother say when she found out about your pregnancy? She asked only one question, who? And when I said my boyfriend left me, my mother knew the lie. She looked into my eyes and she knew. But she didn't say anything. She just said, that child didn't come with your fate. That child will be your salvation. Take good care of her. And one day, this darkness will end. Margaret covered her face with her hands. And I couldn't take good care of myself or of her. Lily was my father's child, but Lily was an innocent child. She had no fault. I loved her, truly, madly, boundlessly. But loving wasn't enough. Protecting wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. Did Lily know the truth? No, I never told her. How could I? Your father is actually your grandfather, and your grandfather raped me for years. How could I say that sentence? Margaret shook her head. Lily died, and she took this secret to her grave, without knowing. Maybe that's good. Maybe some secrets should be buried with death. What do you think? Margaret didn't answer for a long time. Then she spoke quietly. I don't know anymore. I thought for years, did I do right, did I do wrong? Maybe I should have told Lily. Maybe then she would have understood the reason for her anger. Maybe she wouldn't have harmed herself. Maybe she wouldn't have gone to that party. Maybe she would be alive now. Or, I said, maybe learning would have destroyed her even more. You can't know that, Margaret. None of us can know. The choice you made was what you knew best at the time. You tried to protect your daughter, just in a different way. Margaret looked at me. For the first time, there was a faint light in her eyes. We were silent for a long time. There were no words to say, at least not words to say immediately. Some moments need silence. Some pains need only the comfort of having been shared. Outside, the sun had begun to set. Orange light filled the room. Margaret's face looked different in that light, softer, younger, perhaps for a moment freed from the burden of years. Then Margaret lowered her hands from her face, and I saw something unexpected on her face, a piece of peace. Very small, very fragile, but real. I feel good for having said this, she said. Her voice was different, lighter, more open. For years, more than 30 years, I carried the secret. Every day, every night, every breath. Sleeping, waking, eating, walking. It was always there, like a weight on my shoulders. And now, it feels a little lighter. It's still heavy, still there, but a little more bearable. This is a very big step, Margaret. You know that, don't you? She nodded slowly. Yes, and I'm scared at the same time, because I told this secret to you, a stranger. And the world didn't collapse, the sky didn't fall on my head. I'm still here. I'm still breathing. You're still here, I said, and that matters. Margaret looked toward the window. Her eyes drifted into the distance. Lily is gone. My mother is gone. My father is gone. I hope he's burning in hell. Thomas is gone. I don't know where he is, and I don't want to know. And I'm still here. I'm 42 years old. More than half my life is over. And now I'm thinking, what am I going to do with the half that's left? What do you want to do? There was a long silence. Margaret was thinking, perhaps for the first time in years, thinking about the future. I don't know, she finally said. For years I just tried to survive, to make it to the next day, to get through the next crisis. I never stopped and asked myself, what do I want? You can ask now. Margaret turned to me. There was curiosity in her eyes, perhaps curiosity about her own self. Maybe I want to tell Lily's story. One day, how beautiful a child she was, how brave she was, how she kept looking for light even in the darkness. Maybe I can help other mothers so they don't make my mistakes. Maybe this meaningless pain can have a meaning. Voicing trauma is the beginning of healing. Margaret had shared her darkest secret with someone for the first time in years. This required incredible courage. After living with shame, guilt, and fear for years, saying that secret out loud. And now, for the first time, she had started thinking about the future. This was the first spark of hope. Lily's death had devastated Margaret, but sometimes something new is born from devastation, like a phoenix rising from its ashes. Margaret was still at the beginning of a very long road. Processing trauma, mourning, forgiving herself would take years, but she was no longer alone on that road, and that changed everything. Margaret stood up, slowly, as if she had been sitting in that chair for years. She walked to the window. She looked outside. The sun had almost set, its last rays painting the horizon orange and purple. I've never been able to go to Lily's grave, she said. Her voice was soft. I went once after the funeral. The soil was still fresh, the flowers had wilted, and I couldn't stay there. I ran away. Why? Because when I saw the gravestone, everything became real. It said Lily, birth date, death date, 17 years. Only 17 years. And I couldn't handle it. I came home that day and couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. Haven't you been since then? I tried, a few times, but every time I turned back halfway. My feet couldn't carry me, I was scared. How do you feel now? Margaret turned. She looked at me. There was still pain in her eyes, but something else too, determination. Maybe I'll go tomorrow, she said. Maybe I'll tell her everything. Why I couldn't protect her, why I couldn't tell her, why I couldn't be enough. Maybe she won't forgive me. Maybe she won't even listen. She's underground now, bones and memories. But at least I'll have said it. I can come with you, I said. If you want, you don't have to be alone. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but this time the tears weren't just from pain, from something else. Maybe gratitude, maybe relief, maybe hope. Maybe, she said, maybe I'd like that. And for the first time I saw something in her eyes instead of nothingness. Hope. Small, fragile, delicate enough to be extinguished by a breeze. But real. And sometimes real things, no matter how small, are the strongest. I hope this story has made you look at your own life, your emotions, or the people around you with different eyes. I hope this story has helped you understand yourself and others. I would love to hear something about you in the comments, to know you and your story a little more. If you want to share what you're going through, you can write to the email address in my profile. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe. To be notified of the next real-life story, you can click the bell icon to turn on notifications. Before we end, I want to ask you a few questions. Take a moment to think. What do you think about this story? Does Margaret's journey remind you of anything from your own life or the lives of people you know? Can wounds this deep really heal? Or do we just learn to live with the scars? What does healing mean for someone who has suffered this much? If you were in Margaret's place, would you have told Lily the truth? That her father was actually her grandfather, that her mother had been abused for years? Or would it have been better to take this secret to the grave? What do you think about Margaret's mother? That woman lying in a sickbed, unable to protect her daughter, but loving her. Do you blame her, or do you understand her? How can people like Thomas exist? A man who sold his own stepdaughter for money. Where does this darkness come from? Lily's last words were, "I hate you." If you had a chance to see a loved one one last time, what would you say? What would your last words be? And most importantly, was Margaret right when she said, "Game over"? Or does the game never end? Do only the rules change? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Your perspective matters. Your voice matters, and maybe you too have a story waiting to be told.